Just going to do a sound check. Is that okay, everybody? Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Emer. Another Emer.
Welcome, Emer.
I know it's hard to get two of us in the room at once, but there we go. And hello, everyone. Did dirty water kill off Dippy? I suspect you probably already know the answer to that question, but let's come back to an answer or a possible answer at the end. I'll admit that before I start, I'm actually not used to doing this. I'm well out of my comfort zone, and that's why I'm standing down here. I'm actually quite nervous, and I hope you forgive me, but I'm going to hold these in my hand because I need to keep checking time and things. So they're my comfort blankets. So you're probably wondering then, why did you agree to do this? Yeah, that's probably right. Well, probably several reasons, but the most important one was the topic, water. And so I'd like to share some of the things that I've learned about the value of water and the influence or power that it has in our society. So, first let me take you back a little and tell you about me. Emer McGurk, now Emer Murnaghan. I grew up in Belfast during the Troubles. Actually not very far from here, my parents still live in Stramalus. My mother, a teacher, insisted that I studied science, but I wanted to study home economics because I wanted to learn how to bake. Needless to say, I studied science and maths at A level and had not a notion, I had a notion of what I wanted to do. So like all 7th year students, I attended careers events and open days at banks, colleges and universities. My wanderings took me to the civil engineering at Queen's University. So it's the David Keir building, if any of you know it, and it's just actually literally across the road from Stramalus Road, so I didn't go very far from home. In particular, I visited the hydraulics lab. Now this is where I sound really nerdy, which is in the basement, and from the moment of walking through those doors, I have been mesmerised, intrigued and energised by the work of civil engineers. So what was in that lab? So in this lab there was a huge hydraulic wave tank. It was set up to simulate wave action, and the team of young researchers, and there was a woman amongst them, were developing the early prototype of wave energy converters. Wow, this just blew my mind. Water and energy, and all this happening just a few miles from where I lived. So I was hooked, I enrolled, and I loved studying civil engineering. Several people back then also impressed me. One such person was Professor Alan Strong. He was actually from the University of Ulster at that time. We were at one of Alan's lectures, probably not really paying attention, but his opening gambit was civil engineers were more important than doctors. Suddenly we sat up. Almost, and he continued, almost 90% of global public health is due to the provision of clean drinking water and sanitation. The doctors and medicine will make you better again, but you must be alive to start with. So, water keeps us alive. A fact often reinforced in the aftermath of earthquakes and natural disasters. People appear to survive for weeks on water alone. Alan doesn't remember telling me this because I know him reasonably well, and yet it's something that I've never forgotten. It made such an impact on me. The resonance for me being that civil engineers underpin a healthy, thriving society. This was brought home to me very early in my career. So you need to remember that I'm from Belfast, and at 22 was quite naive. Yes, and probably ignorant, because when I got my first graduate job and was asked to go and work in a place called Omagh, I asked, where's Omagh and how do you get there? So definitely ignorant. But for those of you who are visitors to Northern Ireland, Omagh is only 70 miles from Belfast to the west of Northern Ireland. So those of you who are travelling all around the world on your flights, I had to come 70 miles. The irony about it all is now for the last 25 years I have been married and living in that place called Omagh. But back then I got my Ordnance Survey map The older members in the audience will remember Ordnance Survey maps, no sat-nav back then, and headed west. My job role was to supervise the laying of rural water mains, and this is where I need to introduce you to Maggie. Maggie lived high up in the Altamuscan Hills, that's just outside Ballygolly, in a small stone cottage, which was typical of probably the type of homesteads in rural Ireland at that time. Probably just 2 rooms, the bedroom and the other room for everything else. Looking back, Maggie probably wasn't much older than I am now. But to my 22-year-old self, she was old and small, my height, and yet strong and hardy. I clearly remember the crisp January morning that I strode up the hill to her house. I had a hard hat on, high-vis, clipboard. I looked very professional, very important. I was meeting the public. But she must have been watching out for me, because this little woman appeared from her doorway, and before I could say anything, she had grabbed my hand and was shaking it vigorously. And she kept thanking me and saying, "You're bringing me the mains, you're bringing me the mains water." I suppose she'd spent all her life fetching and carrying water from a spring well. It was bound to be a relief to at last have an internal tap. It wasn't just her genuine excitement and delight that made an impact on me, but also the realization that in our civilized society, some people didn't have an inside tap and running water. Before you think I'm ancient, that was 1988, just 30 years ago. But water is free, or so we're told. We hear it all the time on social media. This would appear to be the reason why we refuse to introduce water charges, a consequence of which might be to conserve or be a bit more efficient with our use of water. But I don't want tonight to be political, and to be fair, particularly on this island, we appear to get our fair share of rain. So for the most part, we have plentiful supply of fresh water. So let's agree, it appears to be freely available. However, I've got a few exhibits for you, not just on the slide, but Exhibit A, that's freely available water. That's the water that falls from the sky and the runoff. And I took that from, I was going to say a shuck, but you might know what a shuck is, but sort of a low-lying area. I'm now going to rechristen it a wetland at the bottom of my garden. And this is Exhibit B, and that was taken from my tap in the kitchen this morning. And I know that that water came from one of the local water treatment works, which that water is not only tested when it leaves the water treatment works, but it's tested and continuously tested right across the network. And that ensures that the people of Northern Ireland have safe, clean drinking water, and that keeps us healthy. So, water is life-sustaining. Bear with me a second. So we turn on a tap and take for granted that water's going to flow. But what we don't appreciate is that there's a team of dedicated men and women from Northern Ireland Water and their supply chain. Graham are part of their supply chain, and we're available 24/7, ensuring that water supply is safe and available, that the critical infrastructure, the water treatment works, the reservoirs and the pipe work are maintained and fit for use. And suppose not unlike the medical profession then we referenced earlier. So can any of you remember the last time that you had a boil message? Did any of you have had a boil message? I know there have been a few in the past year, but just I thought I would ask in the room. Or perhaps you remember the Christmas of 2010, when the temperatures dropped to the lowest in 100 years, pipes froze, and then suddenly thawed, and we had huge bursts. I think there's something like 60,000 homes across Northern Ireland were without water for several days, and I think some of them even up to weeks. It was mayhem, because we assume that the tap will always work and the toilet will always flush. We have high expectations, sometimes without taking responsibility for our behaviour. It's just my opinion, but if we don't accept our role in helping to sustain our water supply, we will lose this privilege. I've some other facts that might interest you about our safe drinking water. So, did you know that Northern Ireland Water is Power NI's biggest customer? When I found this out a few years ago, I was absolutely shocked. I just couldn't believe it. And then, because I've been involved in the design and construction of water treatment works, I get it. There's a huge amount of energy used to abstract fresh water, to clean it to a safe drinking water standard, and then to distribute it to all our taps. So our apparently free water has a significant carbon footprint. So when we use water, we use electricity. And similarly, when we waste water, we waste electricity. So if we flip that, because I want to try and be positive here, if we're not wasteful with water and use just enough, then we're not only going to save water, we're actually going to save the associated energy costs. It's a win for people, the economy, and the planet. So I think it's something that we should think about. But why is our water so dirty? We know about the bugs, the twigs, the grit, and the mud. But there's also a whole range of pollutants that we're responsible for. And Heidi referenced some of them earlier. So that's the runoff from agricultural land. It's our bitmap roads and concrete paving. It's our traffic exhausts and our local industrial waste, all contaminating our water sources. So it's not unreasonable to conclude that for the most part, we are the polluters. It is our human activities that contaminate the water, which we then have to clean and test to ensure that it's safe to drink. This sounds like the circular economy in reverse. Our water companies, our water complies actually with European Drinking Water Directive and UK standards, which are actually even more stringent. Not something that I think is about to change with Brexit, so it's here to stay. However, having been involved in the construction and commissioning of several water treatment works earlier in my career, I understand that we need to remove dangerous trace elements. So there's things like arsenic and lead and mercury and bacteria that cause typhoid, cholera and diarrhea. But I think there's a moral debate to be had when we invest so much in cleaning our water, yet in countries not too far away, the people struggle to access a clean, safe water supply. Okay, time for another story. Another woman, maybe this is significant, a much younger woman than Maggie. Her name is Beauty. She lives in Zambia, and this is her story.
Zambia is one of the poorest countries in southern Africa. WaterAid estimates that just 28% of people have access to safe water and that only 24% of people have access to sanitation. Poverty is increasing and health is deteriorating. Beauty Chimbwe is 36 years old and has lived in Kayola village for 12 years.
Ngahemweka bothu kuendera nyambulira akachitika kale so ingandera akuyowa maningi ngoro umenda ngebapha bana aba ndibapeda bokuthi nondira zitabuti mumapenzi pesi ndira akuyowa maningi kuti ndiza chiraba kale muona mbuliza kusango nguhampanda so wakaziswa wakapya buyo muviri alimwa akusomona mbono pocha ndakamutora ku kliniki mwana akumusirika kwe ndakamuleta mwana anganda izwire ku kliniki kwakaenda 2 days pona mwana akazwira ngakunyina kusenga kuti boona kusena ngotho kapupangira kuti kunka kuti katunka kuzimbuzi ngatunka kuyo falanga bokuthawa mparare amunzi ponya wakara ukujati yanga kokuli mbuliji gapati zindija mainza kwenda nya kuti igoti yese tajijarirwe page ribuyo open so kwa kuti ndizari ya doti yakamboka menda ari aenda kwa kuti ndiza menda abora ndizanjira muziguda akamboti ngamenda aire pokwenda zendende muhindi hinji kujanika kuti kusomona takumanipe kapati kubana nokuba kwamba kuti andiswe tobapatinga turasomona pati kujanika maningi kuti vana bobaziswa maningi kuenda nyamenda adoti ngotonya nokuba kuhamba kuti ndiphesinga mehari yangotunywa tarure menga nonywa ulamanje heya chita mungu zuihareza mwine kuti ndizaoreza nguti waya kuti kwavirira maomeso
Recently, as 3 weeks ago, I attended Global Engineering Congress hosted by the Institution of Civil Engineers in London. I met another African woman, and her name was Valerie Agarba. She's from Nigeria, and she's past Vice President of the Nigerian Society of Engineers and the current Chair of Women in Engineering. She's passionate about her profession, her country, and her kinspeople, and she's committed to the education of Nigerian women through the WASH programme, so that stands for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene, because it's recognised that low sanitation affects women and children the worst. So Valerie told us that the most difficult part of the education programme is when the Nigerian mother, a bit like Beauty, realises that in her attempt to nourish and feed her child, that she is responsible for making them ill and possibly even causing their death. It's a huge emotional hurdle that must be addressed and overcome if such intervention programmes are to succeed. Water and sanitation, these are fundamental to the survival of our species. They're also fundamental to the work of civil engineers. So I'm not here to depress you tonight, just to help you understand the bigger story around water and energy and life, the interconnectedness and interdependencies of this shared planet. Let me tell you a little more about this Global Engineering Congress. Engineers from all over the world gathered in London for a week-long conference to discuss and share what they are doing to help deliver the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So the UN SDGs are the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. There are 17 agreed goals or outcomes. They are indeed interdependent and interconnected. They're predicated on the vision that no one gets left behind. They're about finding a balance between sustaining ourselves and sustaining the planet. They're time-bound. We've agreed to achieve them by 2030, just 12 years away. So we each have a part to play. This evening, I want to draw your attention to UN SDG 6, the aim of which is to ensure access to safe water and sanitation for all. Surely not an unreasonable request. So I left that Congress feeling challenged about what collectively we have to do and energised to play my part. So perhaps this event tonight is the start of that commitment. Or perhaps I'm standing in front of you because I've never forgotten the power of Maggie's handshake or the unfairness of Beauty's story. Or perhaps I know that you can all do something. So you could all rush out and become civil engineers, and I would love that. Yeah, what could us? And help us sort the world's water problems. We could get that tick in the box for SDG 6. You could support charities such as WaterAid, either in a volunteering capacity or with your financial support. We could all save water, helping to secure our future water supplies whilst reducing the associated carbon footprint. It's going to be great if you can do any of these, some of them, all of them, take your pick. But probably I've just one thing to ask of you, and it's probably that occasionally you stop and think. The wonderful gifts of life, health and safe, clean drinking water, and be thankful for the fact that you were born here. And probably, just before I finish, I need to answer the Dippy question. If you've been around this superb exhibition, and I don't know if you had a chance to yet, I think there's another opportunity, you'll already know that dirty water probably didn't kill Dippy. Dippy, like us, needed water to survive, but it's also likely that water also drowned Dippy and his friends. You'll see some lovely paintings upstairs. So their changing environment made them extinct. Unlike us, these species used what they needed to survive and didn't unnecessarily pollute their environment. We, on the other hand, are a bit reckless about how we use this planet. We pollute and contaminate without considering the consequences. We might just hasten the extinction of our own species. And yet, we have the knowledge and the capacity to adapt and survive. Thank you for listening. Leave that one back up.
Thank you, Emer. Thank you. That was
over.
fantastic. Breathe. One of the things that caught my attention there was the statistic that you had up. You usually get your opportunity to ask a question now, but I want to ask this before I forget. I'm hogging it. About Nigeria, about 19% of people in Nigeria have access to clean water, but you've said there that there's plentiful resources. Why is that?
So I suppose back again to my naivety, there's actually enough fresh drinking water in the world for all of us on this planet. When I was at that Congress, and by 10 o'clock in the first morning, I had literally met people from all around the world, from Kuwait and Botswana and Korea and you name it, and they were represented. This is important for the people of the world. And just what also probably came out very strongly is we have, and you might not believe it, quite a good democracy here. And probably the biggest challenge in developing countries is corruption. And that for me was quite horrendous. So I remember at one of the events, there was a workshop and there was a guy, a white South African, and he was talking to a guy from Botswana, and they were trying to feel how they could get enough funding to get their baseline count against these SDGs. Because as you know with anything, if you want to improve it, you have to find out what your baseline is. So all countries have to get their baseline against the SDGs. And the guy, and I mean, it was amazing, the guy from South Africa said to the Botswanan, you cannot get your funding from your government or else you will be compelled. And I suppose the inference there was that the story that you will tell will not necessarily be the truth. So that came across very strongly, that level of corruption that I know you might think there's been some scandals recently, and if you were hearing the news earlier this week, we've got maybe another scandal about green energy and anaerobic digesters. So I'm not saying that we're free from corruption, because where there are people, there will be corruption. But it's something that came across very strongly from the African countries that were represented there. Okay. It's probably a bit longer than you thought, but...
No, it's perfect. Do we have questions in the audience? If people could raise their hand if you are keen for a question. Yes, go ahead. On its way, it's on its way.
Thank you, that was great. Very thought-provoking. How can we reduce the carbon footprint of our water cleanup systems? Are people working on ways that we can do that?
So probably there are two things, and maybe, well, there'll be more than two aspects. One certainly has to be one that the water provider can do, and the intervention that they can make. So Northern Ireland Water is trying to reduce its own carbon footprint by increasing the amount of renewables that it uses. But then also the campaign that we need to get on board. I mean, this is, I suppose, at the moment what we think it's someone else's issue, and until we take it home and decide that we can each do something. Yeah, so it's that sort of balance. Yeah.
Do we have, yes, we've got another question here.
What exactly happens to the effluent that is taken out of the raw water and put back? Where does it go to?
Raw water?
Well, the effluent,
cleaned, right.
whatever's cleaned out of it.
Okay, so there are two things that happened. One, that it will go back, the liquid form will go back to the head of a treatment works. So it'll go back and be treated the way sewage is treated. And then there's what's also called the water sludge. And it used to be that we could have put the water sludge to land, but at the minute that is stored. So we haven't got the solution for all these things yet.
What about fluidization? Is that happening here at present?
I don't think fluidization happens in Northern Ireland. I think there was attempts to bring it in. I think maybe in Scotland. So I can't really answer that question. It's, you know, you will know that there's a debate about it, whether it's kind of mass medication or that sort of benefit. And I think at the minute what we've decided is that our dentists all tell us to use a toothpaste with fluoride in it. So, and I know a dentist who actually takes tablets, so there we go. Fluoride tablets. Just before I get
I wasn't sure where you were going with that.
Dental health.
Do we have any more questions from our audience? Yes, we have one at the back here.
Hi, Emer. Thanks very much for your talk. I was just wondering, you mentioned that we're quite a big polluter here, particularly in Northern Ireland, and I know with our agri-food industry, housing industry, there's a lot of pressure on our water resources, you know, with our rivers and groundwater and things like that. Do you think that increasing pressure and not being able to meet the status of the Water Framework Directive, do you think that's going to put pressure on the treatment of drinking water? Is that going to have a knock-on effect? Or is there any proposals for that?
Sorry, just tell me that again.
Sorry, just with the increasing pressure of the agri-food industry, sewage, housing, road developments and things like that on our natural, you know...
On the resources.
On our water resources.
Okay, so probably we have to meet a standard. So this is a standard laid down by Europe and by UK. So we cannot put that water out into supply. It has to be tested, and it's continuously tested. And I know we've got some bottles of water that I'm ashamed to say I'm drinking out of tonight, because but we had tap water earlier, because that water isn't tested the way the water that comes out of your tap is tested and continuously tested. The challenge is going to be that it's going to cost us more water, you know, to actually clean it.
Yeah.
So we have to maintain the standard. So until we challenge that standard, and I suppose that's maybe something that I was getting to, one of the things that probably struck me, and I wasn't going to mention it, was manganese filters, and I'm getting a bit nerdy now. So yeah, so there's manganese filters in our water treatment works. And when we were constructing these, I was saying, well, what do they do? What are they for? Well, apparently, they'll make your whitewashing a bit off colour. I thought, is that actually, and that's kind of the moral debate I want to have. But I suppose I looked up somewhere, I was going to say I did some more research. I Googled manganese, and apparently we do need a certain amount of manganese for our health. So it actually has positive health benefits, but actually what we can also get is toxicity from manganese. So like all these things, there is a balance. But it's that ethics, I suppose. Is it okay for us to have this really pure water when you saw people not only a flight away from here drinking something like that?
We have time just for one more question for Emer, if anybody else has a question. Yes, please go ahead.
What could you do to make your water pure at the tap? Can you add any extra filters in? Are there still some bad things left in that water that you get in the tap?
This one, yeah, and I suppose I'm not going to give you any advice on that. I will tell you that, okay, so water, as you probably all, well, you may not, but because we are brought up living in Ireland, our gut gets used to all the different things that's in water. Because when you go away on holidays and you're recommended not to drink the water, and you can say, but why? It all complies to the European directive, and it does, but it's because there are organisms there that your gut isn't used to, so that's why you do drink bottled water when you're away. Are there other things that we would do? Some people use those water filters. I probably don't, and I'm going to give you my personal reason, because I'm not the scientist here, okay? So if there's somebody out there who is the chemist, why I don't use the water filter is two reasons. One, we're probably filtering out the chlorine that's there to keep us safe. So you're filtering it out. And also then, are you maintaining those filters properly? And what's growing on those filters? You know, so I've probably just interfered with somebody's business model for those filter jugs, but I think some people complain about a taste, and again, that's because of where your source comes from. What I think is lovely is get a sprig of mint. If you've got water in it and it's not, a sprig of mint, some ice, off you go, drink it, it's delicious. It's out of your tap and it's lovely. And whilst we now know that it's not free, it's certainly much better for us and for the environment than the stuff that we're purchasing in plastic.
Super quick question for me, because this is something I've always wondered. Is it unsafe? Is there any difference in safety in drinking from your bathroom tap, asking for a friend? Is that something that's not recommended?
So again, a lot of modern houses will have mains water right into your bathroom, so you need to know that about your system. But if your water is going from the mains up into a storage tank, you should not, you should not drink. It's okay to flush your toilets and we brush your teeth in it and ensure that if your house isn't used, if you're leaving it for a long time, come back and you actually need to run your water a bit. The chlorine only lasts for about 14 days. So this is why we're constantly testing the water right across the networks. Because so you can imagine, I don't know where any of you live, but say your catchment is the Mournes, or the water's coming from the Mournes and it has to get to you away in Belfast. You know, that is all worked out, the length of time that it's going to take from when it's dosed to when it gets to your door. And sometimes we would have inline dosing as well, just to up the disinfectant and therefore protection. Right, so unless you've got mains water, Maggie, unless you've got mains water coming into your taps upstairs, do not drink it. It's a no. Okay.
If you've been doing it for about 26 years.
Well, you're probably going, I am not going to say you're off the hook, Emer, because if you get ill, you'll be going, Emer Murnaghan told me.
Emer Murnaghan said it was okay. Emer, thank you so much. Everybody, we have officially reached our break. Thank you for being so involved and for asking questions. Please go and grab a drink from the bar if you haven't already. Even if you have, go get yourself another couple. Go and check out Dippy if you haven't seen him, because he is the reason we're here. See you back here in 30 minutes. Thank you.